Welcome to the first video on medieval China. China is the most populous country in the world today, being the homeland of over 1 billion people. It is one of the major powers in international affairs today. A significant aspect of China is its long cultural and national history. The Chinese people have shared a common culture longer than any other civilization. For example, the Chinese writing system has been in existence for almost 4,000 years. The Chinese imperial dynastic system of government, which continued for centuries, was established as early as 221 BC. Although specific dynasties were overturned, the system survived until the 20th century. Under the Han Dynasty, from 202 BC to 220 AD, China had grown and flourished as a major classical empire, exerting its influence in the East as the Roman Empire exerted its influence in the West. Think of them as the rival to Rome. They never really meet, but they were both competing for world dominance. China ruled the Eastern world, and Rome ruled the Western. Chinese leaders governed by the principle of the mandate of heaven, a political and social philosophy which held that heaven would always act in the best interest of the Chinese people. If a leader ruled unwisely, he would soon lose his authority, and heaven would ensure that the mandate to rule would go to someone else. Though China had expanded and became strong during their reign, the Han began to show signs of weaknesses that ultimately led to their collapse. After the fall of the Han, China experienced a period of uncertainty, largely due to the fact that the country no longer had a strong central government. At the time that the Roman Empire collapsed, and what was left of that empire shifted east to Constantinople in the late 5th century AD, China experienced a revival. After the Sui dynasty asserted control and reunified the country in the late 6th century, China once again became a powerful empire. So as Rome fell apart, China came back together. Three major dynasties ruled China during the period following this restoration: the Sui from 580 to 618, the Tang from 618 to 906, and the Song 960 to 1127. Historians often refer to this period as medieval China. It corresponds with the medieval times in Europe. While China struggled with serious problems during this era, it also witnessed growth of major cities and experienced a cultural flowering. In the same way that the late Roman Empire struggled with the pressure of invading groups, China too had to deal with the threat of a barbarian invasion. For the Han Dynasty, the invaders came from the northern and central Asia, and defenses against them further served to drain limited resources, both in terms of finances and government attention. The Han Dynasty finally came to the brink of collapse after nearly a century of growing disintegration. Conflict between rival warlords and factions, and general disillusionment with the government hurt the Han Dynasty. As the Han centralized government collapsed, a number of strong regional states developed, including the Shu in Sichuan, the Wu along the lower Yangtze River, and the Wei in the north. These different groups essentially operated as different states and comprised rival warlords who fought amongst themselves for control and influence. The three groups, the Shu, Wu, and Wei, struggled with each other during the time period between the Han Dynasty and the Sui Dynasty, the period of the broken China, the time period of the Three Kingdoms. The Wei are the three kingdoms. This time period is often depicted as a rather glorious time, but in reality, it was a pretty dismal time in which to live. The warlords took advantage of the political vacuum and fought to improve their political power and territorial holdings. Many people in China, however, wanted to see a restoration of centralized control, a return to the great Han times. Due to the lack of any centralized government, plus the conflicts that erupted between the warlords, refugees from the north, including both peasants and educated wealthy elites, fled to the southern part of China to avoid the disarray. Despite the conflicts, creativity still flourished. For example, while the structured nature of the Confucian order essentially disappeared, Taoism thrived. Rather than emphasizing the need to function within one of the five basic types of relationships as taught in Confucianism, the Taoists taught that one should search for harmony with the forces of nature. Regardless of the political break during the time period, there was still an ongoing flowering of culture that acted as a bridge between the Han and Sui dynasties. Our first video on medieval China, we covered the fall of the Han, the period of the three kingdoms, Sui, Wu, and Shi, and we talked about how China got back together under the Sui dynasty.